what we are doing in this lecture is this is actually about the market failure and the possibility of the public good as well as the importance of public good in economic understanding. So that is what is actually we are going to study here. And in the last lecture, what I did was we just asked about the role of government and why the role of government and what are the functions of the government, etc. So with that, we began the public economics lecture, and today what I'm going to do is actually precisely what market failure and other things are going to do with the importance of public economics or public good as such, or we can say that the existence of public good is itself show that there is a market failure. This is what we have learned in the microeconomics lecture. So, with that premise, we cover the rationalization of public good, and in between, in your syllabus, we skipped a couple of things, that is public-private sector, cooperation, or competition, government as an agent for economic planning and development, etc. So all that I'll be giving a small lecture, and I'll upload that in the offline mode. So you can actually download that. So no need of actually spending too much data on live class. Okay, so I'll be concentrating largely on the theoretical lectures. Okay, so let's start. Yeah, given that fact, let me go to the hello. Is it audible? Yeah. Okay. So my video is again stopped, right? Okay. So forget about the video and let us actually go to the audio this slide, because I am going to teach you using some slides. Okay. So now are you able to see the slide? Yeah, it came, right? It's working. Okay. So let us, as I said, the market failure is actually something which we need to understand that in the following order. That the normal, the public economics lecture, in fact, or the existence of public good in fact seen as one of the reason of market failure by the market people, or the people who are actually proposes market as the fundamental device or instrument of economic activity, always say that the existence of public good is a symptom, or it indicates that there is a possibility of a market failure. So market failure implies that the market mechanism did not lead us to the optimum point on the PPC, the production possibility frontier. So market failure established a basis of government intervention, specific source of market failure are public goods, externality, market power, inequity, etc. So the point is that in the market failure literature, uh, the very existence of a public good shows the failure of the market, as well as we can think the reverse. That is actually the government, the existence of the government itself is actually uh, can be seen as the possibility of a market which is actually not going to work or something like that. So, in that context, only what are Samuelson's proposition that public good makes sense, because what he said, the existence of public good, pure, he was actually trying to make a point of pure public good. In the pure public good, that is actually the theory of pure public expenditure. In that paper, what he was trying to make is that if there is a private good and there is a public good, then the both the goods has different characteristics, where you know that private good is actually completely excludable or relatively excludable, then that is actually changes the forms and the characteristics of the goods per se. So if it is purely excludable, then you can say that it is private, as well as the rival nature. So if that is the two criteria which makes actually something a private good, non-excludable, non-right. Well, in the on the other side makes a good public. So non-excludability and non-rival. And then there are also characteristics such as non-exhaustibility. Also says that the good is actually pure public good. So the purity of the good, whether it is private or public, is also depends on this sort of a characterization. So private good, a good or service whose consumption by one person exclude consumption by other. So for example, apple or donut or whatever commodity which we consume. Public good is a good or service whose consumption by one person does not exclude consumption by other. For example, the national defense, police, etc. But still, people can have question on the purity or the nature of that sort of a commodity. But one example, for example, lighthouse, which is an interesting example. Once you make a lighthouse, it is actually a pure public good. If you light the lighthouse, then it is going to help whether people are paying or not. Irrespective of people are paying or not, anybody can use this. So this is a kind of street light, for example. So yeah, so long as you have actually accessibility towards that street, the light will benefit. So whoever you are, doesn't matter whether you paid or not, doesn't matter. So these are actually the kind of examples which people try to say that the nature of public good, or to demonstrate the nature of public good. So the free rider dilemma in that context, it is pretty interesting that commodities are non-excludable, non-rival. That is, people without even paying can also use the thing. So this is actually something we call as free rider. So the communal or the collective nature of public goods may cause some consumer to try for a free ride. That is, they don't pay but they use the thing. So this is what is called a free ride. So a free rider, an individual who reaps direct benefit from someone else's purchase, consumption of a public good, rides along for free on your market purchase. So this is what is actually called the free riding. So when the resources are already private, can be privatizable, then this question of keeping certain commodity as public will always have a problem. So this problem is called the tragedy of commons or something like that. So we will discuss that later. So everyone waits to use the good for free in that context. For example, if public good is available and who is going to provide this kind of question will immediately comes with the public good, because for providing any good you require in fact a lot of expenditure, or you have to spend for the commodity. The question is that who is going to actually incur the cost. So, if it is actually a public good, people will have a tendency to wait for it, and they don't pay. What does it mean? People have a less likely to pay for such commodity, and they will wait for it because the commodity can, without even if you don't pay, you can use the commodity. So this is the characteristics as what Sam Olsen figured out. So since there is no apparent buyer of the good, no producer will bring it to the market. So what is the ultimate result? If everybody try to wait for, or everybody waits for that commodity to come into the market, then what happens is that the commodity never materialize. So this is a problem with the public good in that sense. So people have always a tendency not to spend, but at the same time they want to consume. So there is two type of problem. That is, one is an over use of resources problem. At the same time, without actually paying, there is a problem of payment. And if the problem of payment happens, then the commodity will never materialize. If the commodity never materialize, then you cannot actually have the commodity. So this is actually the dilemma which normally people used to have when they are in the policy making, and the market fails to produce a good that society desires. Now, in this context, it is nothing to do with the market, because in this context, what happened is that, though people need it, but people are waiting for somebody to supply the thing, but nobody is going to supply in that sense. So these are actually makes actually troubles in the market. That is the proper functioning of demand and supply lacks here. So this is what is people try to conceptualize as the market fails. That is, the proper demand as well as the proper supply is depends on the utility. So the utility, or in a cardinal, in a Marshallian sense, it's utility, or even preferential sense, same is the case. So even though you prefer, you will never, because the other person also prefer, but they don't pay. So the payment is now making a little bit problem in the materialization of this resources. So therefore, the market, the functioning of the market also get affected because of the characteristics of the commodity. So this is what is actually fundamentally the problem of public good, as the market economists try to say. But is that the only case which we have to do? I'll come to this problem later. So the market tended to underproduce public good if it produces them at all. So now there is another question, that the first thing, it will never materialize. The second issue is that even if it is materialized, then the supply of such good would be limited or minimal. So this is why people are wondering that why there is lot of public goods available around us. Though we want, all of us would like to have public good and enjoy public good, but at the same time, we are very hesitant towards public good. The easiest example I used to tell in the class is that the SRTC example and electricity example, which is widespread, everybody knows about. So we need, actually, as a student, all of you may be preferring public transportation. Now this is a high time to think about the same, because now all of you are in, because of the lockdown, all of you are in home. Now, if the institution asks you people to come to the institution to study, then the cost would be very high if there is no public transportation. So we all going to actually face the brunt immediately if that is the case. So what the students try to say is actually that not only the student as well as the employees, they say that since it is very costly to travel in private, it is better to stay back in home. And maybe many people will go for online lecture. At the same time, you also have a problem with it. Many people have an accessibility problem with the same. So those who are nearer, they maybe prefers to come. Those who are far, they prefers to have this. So there is always a trade-off between all this thing. So a public good in that sense is a very very important one. What is actually the example gives a sort of interesting point is that no, we don't prima facie we don't value the importance of the public transportation. But when you are in dire need, you when you are in dire need when you are in dire need, you definitely realizes that the importance of public goods such as KSRTC is inevitable. But by that time, you can't build a public transportation system. So this is actually always a problem. That is why the supply of the commodity or public good would be limited in that context. So there is always, even if you produce, that is why this particular statement, even if you produce the resources, the supply would be always lesser than what is the demand which is for the commodity. So government's role therefore is very important. That is, in that context only, government play a very crucial role. Public good cannot be provided by a private person normally, because that will violate the very principle which we start with, that is the private individual behavior would be violated. That is, the economic man's behavior would be violated if the same would be provided by a private agent, if they don't actually weigh the cost benefit in that context. So there comes the importance of the role of government, which we had already talked in the last lecture. So government's role step in and become the buyer. Producer then produces the public good, finances the purchase with tax or user fee, etc. So this is how the government this step inside the supply of public goods. So this is how public good being supplied by the government, and of course, it is always well from the not only the welfareistic point of view, but from ethical or even the very rational of the government. This principle always applies. So let us move to the other issue of public good, which is also called the externality. Externality, a two-party buyer-seller transaction occurs, but there are cost or benefit borne by a third party. Now, this is what if cost can be internalizable, then there is no externality. But if the cost is actually spill over to somebody else other than the consumer or the buyer or seller, then that sort of an additional cost over the other is called the externality. So external can be both positive or negative, and the difference between cost benefit of the market activity is what is called the externality. So when externality are present, market prices are not a valid measure of a goods value to society. So this is very pretty simple, and all we have already discussed about this thing, that is called the positive externality. When somebody uses, for example, if you are liking some smell, then if somebody uses some spray or something like that, then you feel good. At the same time, if there is an asthmatic person on the other side, they may not be feeling good. So these are actually called both the positive externality, and if you have if the very interesting thing is that if there is a positive externality, we never complain. If there is a negative externality, we do complain. So this is what is actually the importance of externality. Normally, if it is a positive externality, then we are also enjoying it, but at the same time, we never say that actually it should not be. Or same time, if it is a negative externality, we do complain and ask for compensations. So this is how, but at the same time, if it is actually a positive externality, we never compensate the other. So there is also a mismatch between the compensation of a negative externality and a compensation of the positive externality. So the third party benefit, as I said, maybe not enough is produced or sold by P1 price. So this is pretty standard microeconomic depiction of externality. So I don't want to talk much on this. Yeah. So if the externality, as I said, in the positive externality, society's benefit is greater than the market benefit, the market underproduce. So what is the problem with the positive externality? Now, if people are getting more benefit out of the positive externality, then market always produce less. So the market underproduce in that context, and the government subsidizes to shift demand. So, what is actually the solution to this problem? Government enters and they subsidizes this sort of a positive externality. Whereas a negative externality is actually a case where society's cost is greater than the market cost. That means the market benefit is greater than the market social benefit. So, in that context, the market overproduce commodity. So the government then restrict production to shift supply towards left. This is what is the standard understanding of what we try to understand in the form of externality. So positive externality and negative externality is always there, and in the case of positive externality, they subsidizes the public, the private producer, or the such at all the producer is private. Then, in the negative externality case, they were strictly taxes the polluter. So this is what is normally try to be understood. And the next one is called the market power problem. So market power is actually the ability of a firm to manipulate the price of a good in the market. Thus, the firm can restrict supply in order to maximize profit rather than produce society's desirable mix of output. So a government's role, that is in this particular context also restrict market power, promote more competition. So a market power is nothing but monopoly. So monopoly, right? So if a market power is one, means there is a monopoly. If market power is zero, then you can say that uh, it is perfect competition. This is how you have to understand about the market power. So if you have a monopoly, then in the entire price of the commodity will be controlled by the producer or the supplier himself or herself. Whereas if you have no control, the supplier or the buyer or the seller, either of them, have no control over the price of the commodity. Say that is only happens in the perfect competition case, which we have already seen in the micro lecture. So there you can say that this role of government to basically, in the market power case, to reduce the market power, that is monopoly. And why? Because monopoly is having the highest price of the commodity. We have already discussed about all that. So if you are in a monopoly, then everything is actually priced at a highest rate. So in that context, government has to step in and control. In that sense, what they try to demonopolize is, or try to promote competition, and if similar sort of firms should be encouraged and sort of thing. So they again, it is also restrict the market power. So, for example, MRTP Act, Monopoly Restrictive Trade Practice Act. So that is one of the way of actually the intervention of the government. The Sherman Act of United States and other things, etc., are the classic case of the interventionist approach of the government in order to reduce the monopoly. What is actually they are trying to do? They are facilitating market. So market means, in that sense, it's not monopoly. Market is actually moving towards perfect competition or competitiveness. So even in the profitability, as we have already seen in the micro lecture, that the profitability depends on how how much power of market you have, or how much monopoly you have in this. Or when you say that when you move towards the perfect competition, your monopoly power is also actually with us. In that sense, it implies that the profitability also falls. So this is what is actually the case with the monopoly in the form of market power. So there is another set of things which is called as the inequity as market failure. So what is inequity is very simple. That is income redistribution reduces the inequity in incomes and provides a minimum amount of merit good. So inequities are actually the society may not be having where so the income distribution of income may not be in a good or in a desirable level. Therefore, the government has to step in. This is all we have already discussed with the role of government. So now government has to intervene and reduce the inequality or inequity in the form of income, provides minimum amount of merit good, for example. If we don't have public system, and then the government has to step in and provide public utilities such as healthcare, education, and other things possible, where this cannot be. Of course, this can produced by the private, but their intention may not be this as same as the welfare of the people. So if the government is interested in welfare, then things are going to be in that direction, that they have to provide it as a merit good. So merit good is actually a good. Society believes everyone is entitled to some minimum quantity of it. So such goods are called the merit good. That such as now in India you have a universal basic education like schooling of till 14 years. You have a right to education. So that right to education say that that education is a merit. Not only now the merit good, but it is now completely a right, completely universal right for Indian child with the age of 40. So similarly, there are people who work for right to food. but right to food. And now, if that is the case, then many of our problem can again get resolved. Now, what is actually the cost for it? A huge cost. Who can do it? A government can only do it. And then how the government is going to fund this through taxation and other things. So this is how the rationalization of government works in this context. So government redistributing, what is actually the process the government do here? The government is redistributes income using a progressive income tax system or some sort of different kinds of income tax, and collect taxes from income earners, and again transfer payment, provide payment to individuals for which no current goods or services are exchanged. So these are the way the government works. And then the macro instability is also being corrected by the goal of macro intervention is to foster economic growth, move out of inefficiency and upon PCC. So reduce unemployment, avoid inflation, stable prices, etc., increasing our capacity to produce economic growth, etc. So government uses macroeconomic policies in an attempt to meet these goals. So this is what is in a way the government try to do. So growth of government, therefore, is also very important. And when society perceives a problem, it looks to government to fix the problem, which provide justification for government intervention in the economy. As a result, government has grown over the last century. That is, we will see that is in the Peacock and Wiseman hypothesis or Wegener's law. Over 10 times more employees since 1900, a budget of 6,000 times larger than since 1900. Okay, you in Gregory Clark is an economist who wrote a book which is nice title. With the title, the title is actually A Farewell to Arms, which was Sigmund Freud's novel. Again, the same with the same title. So this Farewell to Arms is an excellent book, which says that the world economic growth, or the per capita income, or the income of every nation had increased many fold over the last 200 years. So in the first page of the book, first or second page of the book, having a graph saying that the world income had shot, I think many multiple times, like 10, 15 times than what it was in 1800. So now the volume of commodity produced and the amount which we valued are completely different. This is itself shows that the government, again, the intervention of the government is also increasing. So this is says that the government is also grows along with the growth of the economy. So government, therefore, if government grows, means the government also finances. So the government finance also increases. This is what is we are going to discuss in the Wegener as well as Wiseman Peacock hypothesis. So each level of government, that is whether the federal, state, or the local, creates a budget of fund flow and outflow. So inflow, sources of fund, and the taxes and fees, users charge, etc. Then they also have borrowing. So they have an inflow of taxes, which is called the income of this government. At the same time, they also have a borrowing. So that borrowing also being treated as income. When they repay, it is called the expenditure. So outflow is uses of funds, which is purchases of goods and services, payment for resources used, and transfer payments. So these are called the financing of the government, which we are exclusively study in the form of income aspect of the government, which is called the taxes and other borrowings, as well as the expenditure, which is called the fiscal policy. So all this will be studied in separate modules. So this is how the government is actually intervenes, and we have already said that this is all to correct the problem which we have already noted, that is the market failure. So in order to correct the market failure, fine tune the market failure, government is basically supplements. So this is what is actually the standard mainstream argument. So source of government growth is direct expenditure as a percentage of GDP have grown a bit more slowly than the private sector. Most of the growth in federal spending is from increased transfer payment, which now accounts for over half of the spending. State and local government buy much more output than the federal government and employ 5 times as many people. So these are the difference between the central government vis-a-vis the local government. And we also try to study this modeling of the center-state relation, and we have standard theory on that also. So we'll touch upon. Then we have also the problem of taxation, and then different kinds of taxation. In the last lecture, somebody was asked about the whether the GST is a progressive one or regressive. So we have GST, which is the indirect tax, which is one of the largest tax in the country. So that is not actually a progressive one. It is actually a slab based one, which is a fixed one. Whether you are a rich person or a poor person, the payment is goes in that sense is fixed. Therefore, this is not a progressive tax. It is more often in internationally it is being treated as a regressive tax. But if you have different slabs, things are not necessarily bad. So this is also one way of actually getting people income, especially government. Sorry, not people. Government gets income, and then you also have income tax, which is the tax from source. So income tax, the largest single source of government revenue, one of the largest single source of government. In India, it's different. Okay, India income tax is not the largest. In the United States and all, United States and many developed country, this income tax is the largest source. For example, in the Scandinavian countries and all, and their rate of tax is also very high. So and but in India we have only 5 to 6% of people having direct income tax, which is and the base is now the total tax base itself is only 15% or 15 to 16% at most. So given this number, our taxable population is small, especially the directly taxable population. Whereas that is why India, a country like India or many developing countries rely on the indirect tax. And often it is being treated that indirect tax is a regressive tax. So often in a developed country, there are many different tax slabs. Now we have more 5%, 10%, 20%. Recently, there is a bit, yeah, there is a reform in tax slabs. So, but earlier we had only three slabs, and now we have more than three slabs. Again, in many developed countries, the tax slabs are progressive, and there are many slabs. So, if you have many slabs, the point is that the people never feel that they are actually paying very high amount when they move from one slab to the other. But if you have only few tax slabs, then people feel actually try to evade their tax basis in that. Sorry, their tax. There is a higher chance of evasion of tax in that context. So that is another problem with the tax thing. And then as the progressive tax, all of you know that when your income increases, your rate of payment also increases. So now there is another set of tax which is prevails in the developed world, like social. It is a regressive tax system, and income rises, the tax rate falls. So this is As your income rises, the tax rate falls, and compared to those with lower income, those with higher income pay less. So pay more taxes, but pay a small fraction of their income in taxes. So then social taxes. This is what is now people want to reform. Like the old age people, there are recently many write up which is round roams around all of your WhatsApp group or Facebook, etc. That is one nation, one social security pension or something like that, or you should not pay people higher amount, etc. So this is the basis of this thing. Okay, when you retire, you have a very high income, but at the same time you pay less tax than a person who earns income at their initial stage of income earning age. So in that sense people have different perception on this thing. We'll discuss that later when we discuss about tax. So then you have property tax, sales tax, etc. To deal with. That is a major source of local taxes. It is uh, property tax, but in India we have not that much property tax. Our property tax basis is a small one. It is a regressive tax. It is actually discussed as a regressive tax since the proper people devote a large portion of their income. Sorry, poor people devote a large portion of their income to housing costs. So sales tax I have already mentioned about. GST is a sales tax, and there is also in that context people try to say that suppose if all this thing, that is the tax, the revenue side in the form of tax and borrowing, as well as the expenditure side, that is in the fiscal prudence side, if government caters properly, then government supplements the problem of the economy, or what market fails, or whatever failure the market faces can be rectified by stepping in of government. But there are many instances where government fails. This is what is the standard argument against the existence of the government. So why so? So government intervention should move the mix of output closer to society's desirable things. That is, this is a standard theoretical understanding. Like if you have a production possibility frontier, what should the government do? Is actually government has to bring the output mix into production possibility frontier. Okay, but if government is actually, because of the government intervention, if the output goes away from the production possibility frontier, then that is called the failure of the government, because the government is not catering the interest of the thing. So this is actually try to see that government works for market, and not government works for the the welfare of the people. So there is a two different stream of understanding. If you say that the welfare of the people is equivalent to the market uh, welfare, then you can say that this is actually coincides. But at the same time, if you don't see that there is a coincidence between these two things, like the welfare of the people is different to that of market's performance, then the role of government may not be that as good as what we think or criticize. So the government intervention fails to improve economic outcome, and may worsen outcome makes no sense in that later context. But if that does make sense in the former context. So this is what is actually try people try to think. And normally the perception people most of the people argue that the intervention of government is a wasteful waste of resources. So public perception is that the government isn't producing as many services as it could with the resources at its disposal. So this inefficiency pushes the economy inside the PPC. A related question is, are we giving up too many private sector goods in order to get these services? So is the opportunity cost too high, etc.? These are the question immediately looms around the very existence of the very not only the existence of the government but also the very resource wastefulness of the government perception. But we need to be really sensible to understand this problem, because just like I mentioned at the beginning that uh, the importance of a public good system we will never realize this unless there is a dire situation comes. At the same time also, the revolution or whatever counter revolution or revolutions changes which the society had witnessed most of the time is because of many interventionist policy. For example, in the United States, the 1930s had a big push in the name of a New Deal, which was initiated by Roosevelt. So that in fact actually pushed the economy into a new heights, which is Roosevelt himself sarcastically, or we are all now Keynesians. So that means the government intervened, and the government had pumped a lot of resources into its use, and that in fact transformed the American economy into one of the most important economies in the world, or the biggest economy in the world. Similar the case with many developed countries of today. And the importance of the government and the push of government is inevitable very often. That now there are many countries like the socialist countries or whatever the countries, socialist or communist countries. There also the intervention of the state is very very important. Now, if you come back to the state like Kerala, the intervention of the state, whether it is the princely state or the democratically elected state, the intervention of the state is very very crucial as far as the development of the state is concerned. So many people say that okay, the democratic government had done nothing. That at the same time there is a counter argument: the princely state has done nothing, or the British rule has done. So because only part of this argument makes sense, but other part may not be actually make sense to all of us. A simple example in the erstwhile princely state, where people were not only performed the public works, they engage. Even if I am engaged in a public work, I have to work 1 month free. This is what is called the urium. So this is for public work. So 1 month you have to actually work for the state, or the benefit of the state, without getting income. But other month you may be getting. So everybody, most of the working class, they do mandatorily this work. So that means without getting payment, they are doing work. Again, the state which is actually spent too much money, that is the even in the at the time of princely establishment, or the building construction of roads and other thing, there is always a benefit cost difference, which is always being computed in the administrative report. Some reports say that their cost is greater than their revenue. So in some sector they say that their cost is less than their revenue, so they have surplus. So there are different instances where in history we can see that the state is not actually acted as pure profit making. At the same time, the tax income which they got, they were trying to spend. So they are not only actually amazing the whole income in their pocket, but they also took a lot of welfare measure. But the beneficiaries of that welfare measure may be a limited, segment of the society. But still, that is actually they are doing. So, which is actually in the next government or subsequent democratically elected government, people were having more proactive activity, and they pressurize the government to basically spend a lot. So that in fact led a lot of change in the spending pattern. The government, for instance, the government school teachers, aided school teachers, college teachers, everybody got salary from public exchequer because of the policies of the government. So that means previously, even if you work, you don't get salary, you don't get payment as a teacher or whatever. So this is what is you can the very plain picture of the same can be seen in many novels of that time, many stories, realistic short stories, and many drama, political drama, and everywhere you can see this sort of a reflection, social reflection. So what I'm trying to say is that the expenditure of the state is increasing as we conceptualized in the beginning. So the failure of the government is making people pushing towards the PPP is only a theoretical, point. Say that if you don't, but the problem is that are we really a priori to the production of goods and services or allocation of resources? Can we say that where is our PPP? So every if you are actually in the growth mode, that means every point t minus one is always inferior to tth period, because every period you have a growth. A growth means that the previous production point is always an inefficient point, so you get always improvement, and that improvement is what we termed as a growth, or we say the social improvement. So if we are having a positive trajectory of growth over the past decades, then we can say that definitely the role of government is not rigorous, but it is progressive. With this view, let me conclude on the lecture. And the next lecture, which will be having, is about the public choice theory and other stuff. So, thank you very much.